The silence inside the Manhattan boardroom felt unbearable, 47 floors above the crowded streets of New York City, deep inside the polished conference room of Morrison and Associates. Two people sat facing each other across a massive mahogany table that had witnessed the destruction of countless reputations and careers. The steady hum of the air conditioning echoed overhead, but nothing inside that room could cool the pressure building between them. Something explosive was about to happen. Something that would later become one of the most devastating corporate collapses in American legal history. Judy Martinez sat stiffly in her chair, 34 years old, originally from Brownsville, Texas. Wearing a modest navy blazer from JCPenney that looked painfully ordinary against the luxury surrounding her, her roughened hands clutched a worn manila folder as though it contained the weight of the universe itself. Behind inexpensive wire-rimmed glasses purchased from a drugstore, her dark eyes carried the quiet determination of someone who had watched innocent children die while powerful men protected profits. Across from her sat Richard Morrison III, 52 years old, worth more money than Judy's hometown would likely see in decades. He casually adjusted his 18-karat gold cufflinks while straightening a perfectly tailored Armani tie, costing more than many people earned in months. Everything about him radiated power, control, arrogance. He smiled with the cold confidence of a predator, certain he had already cornered his prey. Behind Morrison hung his Harvard law diploma like a trophy passed down through generations. 3 generations of Morrison men had built fortunes, burying dangerous truths so deeply they never reached public view. His sharp blue eyes had intimidated senators, pressured federal judges, and made Fortune 500 executives practically beg for his legal protection. But what was about to happen inside that room would shake every corporate boardroom in America and prove something terrifyingly simple. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone underestimates. Miss Martinez, Morrison finally said, his voice carrying the icy confidence of a man accustomed to crushing resistance. I think it's time you learned how the real world actually works. He leaned forward slowly, his perfectly manicured fingers pressed together like the structure of a cathedral built from corruption itself. People like you, he continued coldly, do not challenge institutions like ours. His smile sharpened. Maybe you should crawl back to whatever forgotten little town you came from before this situation becomes very ugly for you and for everyone you pretend to care about. The threat sliced through the room with surgical precision. Under normal circumstances, this was the moment people surrendered. Richard Morrison had delivered speeches like this hundreds of times before. Small-town whistleblowers usually collapsed under the pressure. They disappeared quietly, while corporations continued poisoning communities, destroying families, and making billions. But Morrison had just made the worst mistake of his entire career. He had absolutely no idea who Judy Martinez really was. He didn't know she had spent the last 8 months mastering federal racketeering laws. He didn't know sophisticated FBI recording equipment was already capturing every word spoken inside the room. He didn't know the quiet compliance officer sitting across from him had already collected enough evidence to destroy not only his client, but his law firm, his fortune, and an entire legal empire the Department of Justice would later describe as one of the largest corporate cover-up operations in modern American history. Most importantly, Richard Morrison did not understand what Judy Martinez was truly fighting for. This was never simply about legal justice. This was about Isabella Santos, 7 years old, dead from a rare blood cancer caused by toxic chemicals illegally dumped into groundwater by Morrison's clients. Judy still remembered Isabella's mother begging her not to stop fighting, even after the death threats started, even after private investigators followed her everywhere, even after Morrison's people tried framing her with fabricated criminal accusations. What Morrison was about to hear would destroy everything he had spent decades building. And it would expose a conspiracy so horrifying that Congress would eventually rewrite corporate crime laws because of it. Judy Martinez's response would not merely end a legal career. It would expose a criminal network stretching through powerful corporations, government agencies, and legal institutions protecting profits while innocent children died. And in the end, it would prove something no amount of money could erase. The strongest weapon against corruption is not wealth, not political influence, not Ivy League education. Sometimes it is simply one person refusing to stay silent while innocent people suffer. The stage had already been set, and Richard Morrison had no idea he was already losing. This was never just another corporate intimidation meeting hidden inside a luxury Manhattan boardroom. It was the final confrontation in a secret war that had been unfolding behind the scenes of American corporate power for more than 10 years. A war fought not with bullets or armies, but with buried environmental reports, falsified scientific studies, manipulated safety records, and the slow poisoning of innocent families through toxic contamination. As Richard Morrison sat confidently adjusting his expensive gold cufflinks, he had no idea he was staring directly at the woman who was about to expose the largest environmental cover-up in modern American history. A conspiracy so massive and deadly that future investigators would compare it to some of the biggest political scandals the country had ever seen. And the stakes extended far beyond the polished walls of Morrison and Associates at that exact moment in neighborhoods across Texas, Louisiana, and Ohio. Children were dying from horrifying forms of cancer that many doctors had rarely encountered before. 7-year-old Isabella Santos had only been the beginning. In Louisiana, Marcus Thompson lost his battle with leukemia 6 months earlier. In Ohio, 9-year-old Emily Chen was enduring another brutal round of chemotherapy while tumors consumed her fragile body. And only weeks before this meeting, 12-year-old David Rodriguez had been buried, while dozens of grieving families stood beside his grave, terrified their own children might be next. The connection between every one of those families was not coincidence. It was ChemCorp Industries, Richard Morrison's most profitable client, for more than 15 years. ChemCorp secretly disposed of dangerous industrial waste by injecting toxic chemicals directly into underground aquifers, supplying drinking water to more than 800,000 Americans. And they knew exactly what those chemicals were doing. They possessed internal reports proving contamination risks. They had Environmental Protection Agency studies confirming the dangers. They had scientific evidence linking their waste to growing cancer clusters in nearby communities. And they had Richard Morrison III ensuring none of that information ever became public. Morrison and Associates was not merely a law firm. It was a fortress protecting corporate criminals from consequences. For nearly half a century, 3 generations of Morrison lawyers had perfected the art of legal intimidation so effectively that they transformed the American justice system into a weapon shielding the powerful while destroying anyone who threatened them. Their success rate was legendary. Every whistleblower who challenged them disappeared professionally, financially, or socially, not through violence, through destruction far more sophisticated. First came the friendly phone calls, polite suggestions that perhaps the whistleblower misunderstood what they discovered. Then came surveillance. Private investigators appearing outside homes, schools, offices, grocery stores reminding targets constantly that they were being watched. When fear alone failed, the pressure escalated. Anonymous letters, late-night calls, tax investigations, child protective services visits. Destroyed reputations, ruined marriages, bankrupt families. By the time Morrison and Associates finished targeting someone, their entire life had usually collapsed. And somehow, most of it remained technically legal enough to avoid prosecution. Their client list looked like a directory of America's worst corporate offenders, pharmaceutical companies hiding dangerous side effects, oil corporations covering up environmental disasters, chemical manufacturers knowingly selling products linked to cancer, and Morrison protected them all. Richard Morrison III inherited this machine of corruption from his father, who inherited it from his grandfather before him. The Morrison family transformed corporate defense into a multi-billion-dollar empire. And Richard expanded it into something even colder and more ruthless than previous generations and imagined possible. His personal fortune exceeded $200 million. Money earned almost entirely by ensuring corporate crimes escape justice. But Richard Morrison had never faced someone like Judy Martinez. And he had no idea she represented the one kind of opponent his family had never truly defeated before. Someone with nothing left to lose, Judy was not motivated by wealth, not by career ambition, not by political power. She was motivated by the faces of dying children and the desperate voices of mothers begging for accountability. 8 months earlier, when Judy first uncovered falsified environmental reports hidden deep inside ChemCorp's records, she still believed the system would work honestly. At first, she reported everything through official internal channels, expecting immediate investigations and emergency intervention. Instead, supervisors instructed her to stop searching for problems that didn't exist. When she refused to stay silent, she was transferred into another department. When she continued asking questions, she was placed on probation for creating a hostile work environment. That was the moment Judy finally realized the terrifying truth. The corruption extended far beyond ChemCorp itself. Government officials were helping protect them. Former Environmental Protection Agency administrators received lucrative consulting contracts after leaving office. State regulators accepted future board positions. Federal prosecutors were quietly encouraged to avoid environmental crime investigations entirely. The corruption network was so deeply funded and politically protected, it appeared untouchable. ChemCorp alone spent more than $40 million in only 5 years on legal defense, lobbying campaigns, and what they publicly called community relations. They funded university studies claiming their chemicals were harmless, sponsored medical research denying links to childhood cancer, and donated millions to children's hospitals to create public sympathy, shielding them from criticism. But Richard Morrison underestimated two dangerous things: a grieving mother's determination and a compliance officer's obsession with detail. While Morrison focused on intimidation and fear, Judy focused on evidence, quickly, pannily, relentlessly. And by the time she walked into that Manhattan boardroom, she had already built the foundation capable of destroying an empire. By the time Judy Martinez entered that Manhattan boardroom, she was no longer the frightened compliance officer Richard Morrison believed he was about to silence. During the previous 8 months, she had transformed herself into something corporate America had never successfully dealt with before: a whistleblower who could not be bribed, intimidated, manipulated, or destroyed. While Morrison believed he was preparing to crush another small-town employee, Judy spent months studying federal racketeering laws, environmental crime prosecutions, and the legal weaknesses hidden deep inside ChemCorp's empire. She built relationships with federal investigators specializing in organized corporate crime. She documented every threat, recorded every suspicious interaction, photographed every piece of evidence linking ChemCorp's pollution campaign to corruption inside both corporations and government agencies. Morrison thought he was facing an emotional young woman from Texas. In reality, he was sitting across from the person who would soon expose a criminal network poisoning American families for more than a decade. And Judy's evidence was so methodical, so comprehensive, and so devastating that it would eventually lead to the largest corporate criminal penalties in American history. The war had already ended before Richard Morrison even realized it had truly begun. But to understand why this confrontation became legendary, you first needed to understand the enormous difference between the two people sitting inside that room, Richard Morrison III represented the very peak of American corporate privilege and legal power. Judy Martinez represented everything that system tried desperately to silence. Judy grew up in a trailer park outside Brownsville, Texas. Her father worked exhausting double shifts at a chemical plant. Her mother cleaned office buildings late into the night simply to help pay for Judy's school books. She became the first person in her family to graduate high school. Later, she earned a business degree from the University of Texas and accepted a junior compliance officer position at ChemCorp for only $34,000 a year. At the time, Judy genuinely believed corporations obeyed laws and that her job existed to help them operate more responsibly. Richard Morrison III lived the exact opposite life. Privilege surrounded him from birth. His grandfather founded Morrison and Associates in 1923. He attended elite prep schools alongside future senators, judges, and politicians, graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, and inherited billion-dollar corporate accounts before reaching 30 years old. Morrison owned a $12 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, a private island in the Bahamas, and a wine collection worth more than most families would earn in multiple lifetimes. The contrast between them was staggering. Judy drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles on it. Morrison traveled through Manhattan inside a custom Bentley driven by a private chauffeur. But the most important difference between them was never money. It was morality. Richard Morrison became wealthy protecting corporations that knowingly harmed innocent people. Judy Martinez was willing to destroy everything in order to stop children from dying. Morrison's campaign against Judy began with cold precision. His firm followed the same intimidation strategy that had successfully destroyed over 100 whistleblowers before her. At first came the polite conversations. ChemCorp executives calmly suggested Judy may have misunderstood the environmental data she discovered. When she refused to back down, the conversations became more aggressive. Calls started arriving at 2 a.m. discussing concerns about her future employment. Within days, Judy noticed black SUVs appearing everywhere she went. Outside her apartment building, near grocery stores, waiting in parking lots during lunch breaks. The message was obvious. We are watching you and we can reach you anywhere. When Judy contacted local police, officers explained there was technically nothing illegal about vehicles sitting in public spaces. The intimidation escalated quickly afterward. Anonymous letters started arriving at her apartment containing disturbing details about her routines, favorite coffee shop, grocery habits, and the roads she used when visiting her elderly parents. One envelope contained a telephoto photograph showing Judy walking toward her car. Another included a copy of her mortgage paperwork with a handwritten warning in red ink. Your future depends on making smart decisions. Then came the professional attacks. Judy's supervisor called her into his office and calmly questioned her mental stability. He suggested unpaid psychiatric leave to address what he described as paranoid conspiracy behavior. When Judy refused, she was transferred into a windowless basement office where her new assignment involved filing meaningless safety reports that disappeared forever into storage. But Richard Morrison made one catastrophic mistake. Every threat, every suspicious vehicle, every intimidating call, every illegal surveillance tactic was being carefully documented. Judy recorded conversations, photographed license plates, maintained detailed logs, and secretly shared evidence with federal investigators. The private investigators Morrison hired to destroy her life unknowingly became witnesses, helping build her criminal case instead. Every law they violated while trying to intimidate Judy became additional evidence supporting federal prosecution. Morrison believed he was slowly breaking Judy Martinez apart. In reality, he was handing her everything necessary to destroy him permanently, and finally, the moment arrived. Richard Morrison finished delivering his threat-filled speech and leaned back comfortably in his leather chair. fully expecting Judy to collapse exactly like every whistleblower before her. Instead, Judy Martinez smiled. Not nervously, not weakly, confidently, calmly, like someone who already knew the outcome. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, while reaching inside her worn briefcase, "before you threaten me any further." The room became still. "There's something you should probably know," and for the very first time that day, Richard Morrison's confidence began to crack. Judy Martinez slowly opened her worn leather briefcase and reached inside with complete calmness. Richard Morrison watched carefully, still attempting to maintain the confidence that had protected him throughout decades of corporate warfare. But something about Judy's expression had changed. The fear he expected was gone. Completely gone. In its place sat the calm certainty of someone who already knew victory belonged to them. Then Judy placed a small digital recording device directly onto the polished mahogany table between them. The entire room froze instantly. "Every word you just said," Judy explained quietly, "has been recorded." Morrison's confident smile weakened for the first time. "And not only recorded," she continued calmly, "but transmitted live to FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, who is currently downstairs in the lobby holding a federal warrant for your arrest." For the first time in decades, Richard Morrison's face lost all color. Around him, several associates immediately began whispering frantically, while panic spread across the boardroom like fire. But Judy was nowhere near finished. She calmly removed a thick manila folder from her briefcase and opened it with deliberate precision. "For the past 8 months," she said, "while you were busy trying to intimidate me, I was busy studying federal racketeering law." Her voice remained completely steady. "Did you know witness intimidation against a federal investigation carries mandatory prison sentences?" The room stayed deathly silent. "You should also know something else, Mr. Morrison." Judy's eyes hardened. "Isabella Santos's mother didn't simply ask me to expose what happened to her daughter." A heavy pause filled the room. "She asked me to make sure no other child dies the same way." The emotional weight of those words crushed the atmosphere instantly. "So I made her a promise," Judy continued softly. "I promised her every person responsible for Isabella's death would eventually face justice." Her voice sharpened slightly, "including the lawyers who protected the people covering it up." Morrison suddenly attempted to interrupt for the first time all meeting, but Judy cut directly through him. "The FBI has been investigating ChemCorp for 6 months, she stated firmly. "And you personally have been under federal surveillance for 3. Richard Morrison's breathing visibly changed. "Every threat." Judy opened the folder wider. "Every intimidation tactic." Another page turned. "Every illegal surveillance operation." Another page. "Every witness you attempted to silence." Another. "Documented." Another. "Recorded." Another. "And prepared for federal prosecution." The confidence that once made Richard Morrison feared throughout corporate America was disappearing in real time. The man who spent nearly 50 years destroying other people's lives now looked like someone watching his own future collapse directly in front of him. Judy leaned slightly forward. "You are not simply going to lose your law license, Mr. Morrison." The silence became unbearable. "You are going to federal prison." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Several Morrison associates stared downward in complete disbelief, while others silently calculated how quickly they themselves needed legal representation. For decades, Morrison and Associates operated like an untouchable empire. Now it suddenly looked like a sinking ship. And Judy Martinez, the quiet compliance officer they mocked and threatened, had become the person holding the match. Outside the boardroom, events were already moving rapidly. Federal agents positioned themselves throughout the skyscraper. Mitch warrants had already been approved. Corporate records were being seized. Bank accounts were being flagged. And one of the most powerful legal empires in America was only minutes away from complete collapse. Meanwhile, Richard Morrison remained frozen inside his leather chair. For perhaps the first time in his privileged life, he understood exactly what helplessness felt like. He opened his mouth slightly as though searching desperately for one final legal maneuver capable of saving him. But there wasn't one. Judy Martinez spent 8 months preparing for this exact moment. Every threat Morrison made strengthened her case. Every intimidation tactic became evidence. Every corrupt action tightened the federal investigation around him like a noose. And now the trap had fully closed. The irony was devastating. Richard Morrison built his career intimidating frightened people into silence. Now he sat speechless while the very woman he tried to destroy calmly dismantled his empire directly in front of him. Judy slowly closed the manila folder. Then she delivered the sentence that would later appear across every major news network in America. "You spent 47 years teaching corporations how to escape consequences," she said quietly. A pause. Today, her eyes locked directly onto Morrison's. "You finally learned what consequences feel like." The boardroom remained frozen in total silence. And somewhere far below, federal agents were already waiting in the lobby. Within only a few hours, Richard Morrison III's empire completely collapsed. Federal agents arrested him publicly outside his exclusive country club, while wealthy executives and elite members watched in stunned disbelief. The same man who spent decades terrifying whistleblowers, manipulating legal systems, and protecting corporate criminals now stood in handcuffs, surrounded by FBI agents and federal prosecutors. News helicopters circled overhead. Television cameras captured every second. And by the end of the night, footage of Morrison's arrest dominated every major news network across America. Federal raids began immediately afterward. Morrison's Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park was seized by authorities. His private island in the Bahamas was frozen as part of the criminal investigation. Bank accounts connected to Morrison and associates were locked down. Corporate files were confiscated, and the legal empire that spent nearly half a century protecting corruption began collapsing almost overnight. Within 6 months, Morrison and Associates officially shut its doors permanently. The once untouchable law firm, feared throughout corporate America, ceased to exist entirely. Meanwhile, ChemCorp Industries faced consequences unlike anything previously seen in environmental crime history. Federal investigators uncovered decades of illegal toxic dumping, falsified environmental studies, witness intimidation campaigns, bribery schemes, and systematic cover-ups involving both corporations and government officials. The criminal penalties exceeded $2 billion. Hundreds of executives faced prosecution, and more than 800 affected families finally received compensation for the devastating damage inflicted on their children and communities. Richard Morrison III himself received 25 years in federal prison for racketeering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and witness intimidation tied to environmental crimes. For the first time in his life, wealth, political influence, and legal manipulation could no longer protect him. Meanwhile, Judy Martinez became a national symbol of courage and accountability. The FBI awarded her its Citizen Service Medal for helping expose one of the largest corporate criminal conspiracies in American history. She also received a multi-million-dollar whistleblower reward for exposing the operation. But money was never the reason she fought. The real victory came from ensuring no more children would die silently while corporations buried evidence behind lawyers and political influence. And the impact of Judy's actions spread far beyond one criminal investigation. Congress passed sweeping environmental crime legislation requiring mandatory reporting protections for whistleblowers and dramatically increasing penalties for corporate cover-ups involving public health risks. For the first time, powerful corporations understood something clearly. The era of quietly intimidating whistleblowers into silence was ending. Judy Martinez did not merely expose corruption. She systematically dismantled an entire criminal structure piece by piece. And in doing so, she forced corporate America to confront consequences it had avoided for generations. Years later, Judy founded the Isabella Santos Foundation, named after the little girl whose death first pushed her into battle. The organization now helps whistleblowers safely expose corruption, environmental crimes, and dangerous corporate cover-ups. Under Judy's leadership, the foundation has already assisted in dozens of successful prosecutions involving illegal corporate activity, protecting countless communities from harm. Meanwhile, Richard Morrison's downfall became required study material inside law schools throughout the country. Professors used his case as a warning about what happens when legal brilliance becomes disconnected from morality. His empty penthouse overlooking Manhattan became a symbol of something terrifyingly simple. No amount of wealth can protect corruption forever when courageous people refuse to stay silent. And perhaps that became the greatest lesson of all. True power is not measured by money, threats, or political influence. It is measured by how much truth someone is willing to defend and how much courage they are willing to show when everyone else chooses silence. Judy Martinez proved that sometimes one ordinary person with integrity can destroy an entire empire built on fear. She reminded America that justice does not belong only to the rich, powerful, or politically connected. Sometimes justice belongs to the person brave enough to stand up when everyone else backs down. And long after Richard Morrison's empire disappeared, that truth remained: the quiet compliance officer from Brownsville. Texas accomplished what billion-dollar corporations, government officials, and elite law firms believed was impossible. She exposed the truth, protected innocent families, and permanently changed American corporate law forever. What began as one woman sitting quietly inside a Manhattan boardroom ended as one of the greatest corporate takedowns in American history. And it all happened because Judy Martinez refused to let innocent children die while powerful men counted profits.